So Indonesia, India, Brazil, and so on. So capital formation, capital investment is the real weakness there. And it seems to me that's a function of largely education. Is that fair to say?
That's exactly what it is. I mean, they're
Okay.
all ones that, as they get the education right, and they're working on it. Most of these countries are being quite responsible in that area. As they get that right, so the investment comes in, so the consumer gets more affluent, and it becomes a virtuous circle.
Okay.
And
But what time scale are we talking about for that consumption to come in a really notable way? For example, to take the place of, say, the under 40 Chinese consumption or the under 40, say, Western Europe or American consumption?
well, that's the bad news. I mean, it's going to take India at least 15 years to get there because
Okay.
the education's only just coming right. And again, to pick on India, India's urbanization 10 years ago, it was 30% of the population. Today, it's 33% of the
Oh,
population.
wow. Okay.
If you're an
So it's not
uneducated,
happening nearly fast enough.
no, when you're an uneducated girl in a village, why would you go to a slum somewhere off a big city? Your lifestyle would be actually worse, not better. So they haven't been able to get that China effect of moving people from low productivity agriculture into high productivity urban type work.
Yeah, Clint, but I think a lot of the, particularly the Westerners who are watching this would say, yeah, but I've been to Gurgaon and I've been to the kind of tech hubs in India and I see, a lot of women coming up in those hubs or have come up in those hubs over the last 10 or 20 years. But is that just such a small percentage that it matters, but it's not making a huge difference?
Exactly. It's a small percentage. I mean, remember, India is just behind China in terms of total population now. And by 2045, it's 1.5 billion people. Because
Right.
they've got the birth rate under control as well. It's dropping. But again, they've got an inertia of more women of childbearing age coming through. So total births keep going up. So
Right.
they've got this problem of just too many people looking for jobs, which keeps the wage rates down and that. And that's what's frustrating the education system too, is they have to keep growing the number of school places to stand still, let alone expand. But they're getting that right. So I don't want to sound negative about that. All these countries are doing quite nicely on that. So I'm positive. But the one important point to make is the demographic dividend hasn't been collected. There was a lot of talk about India having a demographic dividend because they had all these young people entering working age. But the trouble is they weren't well enough educated, so they didn't find jobs. In 2010, the propensity of a working age person to be in work was 58%. It's now 50%. In other words, they
Wow.
couldn't find the jobs to fill these people. So the dividend never paid off.
Okay, so jobs lead to consumption, of course.
That's right.
But I guess so it's going to take these countries 10 to 15 years or more to get the quality of jobs that are needed.
Yeah.
So, that growth that we've lazily relied on, say, China for the last 10 to 20 or 20 to 30 years, is there a gap between now and 10 to 15 years from now in terms of the rate of growth for, say, consumer goods and, say, economic kind of new market entry, that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, this is the crisis that's coming, because if we take again what I call the family stage countries with India, Brazil, etc., they actually need around about 250 million extra jobs in the next 25 years to maintain their existing level of employment, not lift it, just maintain it, and that gives them a reasonable level of income, not great, but hopefully with education, etc., the earnings go up. Yep, but let me put another layer on the cake, so to speak. There's this
Okay.
fourth group of countries, which I call young poor. I call them young because the median age of all of the countries in this group is 20, and some of them have a median age of 14. Mali and Niger both have a median age of 14. That means half the population in those countries is under the age of 14 today.
Wow.
Yeah, and their birth rates are high. The average birth rate, unweighted across these countries, is 130 per 1,000 women. Most countries are at 40 elsewhere in the world. And the number of women of childbearing age, of course, are going up dramatically because of that as well. So even though the birth rate is starting to come down, it goes up dramatically. And it has a seismic effect. First of all, there's roughly 1 billion people in this part of the world at the moment. In 25 years' time, there's 2 billion of these people. In other words, in 25 years, they add 1 billion people to their populations. And if I can just go on and to take Nigeria, for example, at the moment has 45 million school-age children, irrespective of whether they're going to school. Most of them are not. 45 million, it's 90 million in 25 years' time. So just to stand still on education, they have to double their education budget. So let alone any issues of improving it.
Okay, so but governments need tax revenue to grow their budgets. So will there be the incomes to allow them to grow those budgets just to keep up with where they are? And further, will they be able to accelerate the job growth to make sure they have those incomes to keep their education, to improve their education, like say India or Indonesia is doing?
Well, this is the crisis that's coming, because the answer simply is no. And it's no for the simple reason that up until now, and this is really what I was saying, we're at a cusp. Up until now, the growth in consumption by the older affluent, or the older countries generally, which includes China, has been such that it's kept relatively full employment throughout the world. There's been enough jobs for those that are looking for jobs. I know it doesn't sound it, but even the young poor countries have been trotting along at about 55% of working age people employed, which seems to work out quite well. But suddenly that whole relationship changes. As I said, the countries that account for, well, the old affluent account for 63% of global consumption. The other old add another 14%, so you're up to 77% or 80%, chuck in a bit of India, 80%, which is also flattening out. So the countries that account for 80% of the money that's spent by households now flatten out in the growth of their demand. Layer on top of that there's continuous increase in productivity per worker. The number of workers needed to meet the new additional demand over the next 25 years is 300 million. And as I told you earlier, there's 740 million people that are going to be looking for an extra job. Wow. There's going to be roughly 400 million people, mainly in the young poor countries, a little bit in the family stage countries, who are of working age, would like to have a job, but can't get a job. That's 400 million.
That's astounding. Okay, so that's as big as, say, the EU, right?
Yeah, well, bigger.
Kind of in the ballpark. So if everyone in the EU didn't have a job, but they wanted a job, man, woman, and child couldn't get a job. Okay.
That's right.
So that's terrible. So what do you think those people will do? What do you think some of the effects will be of this? First of all, where is this kind of generally geographically? Is this the kind of Bangladesh, Nigeria, kind of those types of countries?
It's biased, obviously, to the African continent and what we call South India, but not including India or Sri Lanka, who tend to be a little bit out of that.
So and there's a few, Pakistan, yeah, Central Asia generally.
And there's a few small countries, obviously, in South America or Central America that are falling into this category as well. So it's reasonably concentrated geographically. Okay. And it's a real worry. Yeah. I think of myself, if I was turning, well, let's say 20, and I cannot get a job, I'm scrabbling for food, I'm scrambling for water in some places of the world. Right. What do I do? I've got nothing to lose. might as well do something dramatic
Right.
rather than just die miserable, which is terrible. So I think the world has a fairly major migration problem coming. These people are going to walk north.
Right.
I would. So I don't blame them. But it's a desperate situation. So much so that in my own mind, I say it's all very well to donate money to buy mosquito nets and things like
Right.
that. I actually think it would be better to donate money for a TV and an internet connection so we could educate the kids, because we could deliver education quite cheaply using modern technology.
Right.
And if you could educate them, then they could do more productive things, and then, and so on and so on.
Right.
We get them out of it. But there's no easy solution to this one. These people are largely alive today or will be alive in the next 10 years.
Okay.
And the consumption trends, well, they're there too. The people with the money are getting older and saving. So the drawbridges are coming up.
Wow.
So this is
So-
leading to some other.
So migration, the migration issues we've seen over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, sounds to me that they only intensify over the next, say, 15 to 20 years.
Oh, incredibly so.
And
Yeah.
Europe is really the focal point. Yes, the US has some issues, and maybe India, China have some issues, but it really seems to me that Europe is the major focal point there.
Well, it's the easy one to get to.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's some other dimensions of migration too, which is starting to come under stress. I mean, for example, let's take the UK. It has one nurse for every 440 people in the population. So if you get sick, your access to a nurse is pretty good. But the UK hires nurses who have been trained and educated in the Philippines, where there's one nurse for every 4,000 people in the population. Is that morally correct? Should affluent countries take skilled workers from developing countries?
But can you blame that worker for wanting to go to?
No, not at all. If I was the nurse, I'd be on the plane.
Right.
I fully agree. I mean, basically, you've got the individual motivation and you've got the moral issue, and you've got the need. And then even if you take a country like Greece, which everyone says, oh, that's nice and comfortable. Greece's population has dropped by 1 million people in the last 10 years. And that 1 million that are gone are skilled workers who got on a train and went north to Germany, because under the EU, they can move.
What
So
percentage of
Greece-
the population is that?
Well, about 10%.
10% of the population is left. Wow.
Yeah. It's a big drop. And you don't blame the skilled plumber or electrician or whatever,
Right.
because he or she can earn 2 to 3 times as much going to Germany or getting across to Britain, which they could do perfectly legally. And then in 5 years' time, their wife is with them, their kids are going to school, their kids speak German now, they never go back.
Does this change, let's say the education deficit issues and the jobs deficit issues in Africa, does it change immigration policy in Europe? For example, in the way Australia has the checklist of skills and those sorts of things to migrate. Does Europe come more to that type of migration policy, to where they incentivize people, let's say in parts of Africa, before coming, meaning get educated, do these sorts of things, and you can definitely come in? I mean, it certainly sounds like something that would be really helpful for places like Greece.
Yeah, but not too helpful for places like Nigeria.
Right.
They're losing their skilled worker.
Right.
The ability to lift the Nigerian economy is going to be a function of having skilled people. And
Right.
if Greece takes them, that's actually not that great.
Right.
So yeah, you sort of resolve the Greek problem, but you don't resolve the core problem,
Right.
which is a bit further down
That's
the chain,
true.
so to speak. Yeah. So it's interesting because Greece, with its dropping population, its household values are dropping because the number of households is going down. And that's the core asset of many households. So it's trying to create some economic problems as well, because the asset they could borrow against is going down in value, not going up in value. And it's not just Greece, it's Italy, it's Spain, it's Romania, it's Poland. They're being, some of their talents being sucked out, and that's not good.
So in sum, let me try to sum this up, because this has been a great conversation and it's really opened up a lot of things that I haven't really thought about before. So global consumption generally for, let's say, the next 10 years or so is relatively stable. We won't see the rapid expansion that we saw in places like China over the last 10 to 20 years. So let's say the pull on commodities right now, the inflation we're seeing, this sort of thing, that stuff really tamps down pretty quickly and really stabilizes for maybe a decade or so. Exactly. Is that fair to say? Okay. Yep. Then once that stabilizes, then we see real disparities as these kind of young, poor countries explode in population. But the wealthy countries are pretty stable and continue to be pretty rich, right? So we kind of have a status quo for the next decade or so, but then after that, there's a real danger that emerges from global disparity.
That's right. You start to have a major, what I'd call a population crisis.
Wow. Okay. Clint, it's a little bit dire.
Yeah, sorry about that.
But no. This is great. Before we go, can you talk about, I know you have a couple of books coming out. Can you tell us what they're about? I know they're a little bit from coming to press, but I think it would be really helpful for people to understand what you're writing about.
Right. Well, one of the two books is basically called 2045, The Growing Demographic Crisis. And it's pretty much along the lines that I've just discussed. The difference is all the data's there. You've got the data at, if you like, the segment level, but you've also got it by country level. And you can see how the numbers play out. It's not some bozo in an office making these numbers up. They're actually there. They're pretty solid. The core source, of course, is the World Bank and the United Nations, so you can't really argue with that. And it's all the numbers behind what I've just discussed. And the second book coming out is called China 2040. Similar sort of theme. And why I've done that is China's going through a lot of change, as I explained. And China will continue to be important economically and politically for the next 10 years at least, if not longer. We know that. So it's actually quite important that people have a better understanding of what China is like demographically. It's not one country. It's at least 31 countries.
Right.
There's differences in consumption within that. It's quite diversified. This book is, if you like, the primer for someone that's either doing business, thinking of doing business, investing in whatever into China. If you haven't read it and you don't know China, then you'd be dealing somewhat riskily. If you've read this, it'll help you focus where the opportunities potentially are. So thanks for the opportunity to mention that.
Of course. Thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous, and I think we've taken in a lot. I think I'm going to watch this 2 or 3 times before I kind of fully take it in. So I really appreciate it. For everyone watching, please, we'd really appreciate it if you'd like the video. We'd love it if you'd subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.